Just want to do a very quick demo to show you how you can adjust resin with very hot or boiling water. So first, it's important to point out that depending on which company and you've got your resin from, everyone uses slightly different types of resin with different properties. So some are going to bend and have a kind of a point at which a temperature at which they bend slightly different to others. So bear that in mind. It will, and obviously the thickness of the part is going to have a bearing on how easily it will bend. But for most miniatures, they've got fairly thin parts. This is just a good little thing to bear in mind. So all I do is boil some water. Obviously, be careful with boiling water. And it's a typical example. This is a little halfling dodo rider. This won't happen. The lance on this is fine, but just to give an example, if sometimes when you get a model, it can be distorted very slightly. So you might want to change it. So what you've got to do is just dip the part. Obviously, be careful. Depending on what you're dipping, if it's too close to your fingers, just use some pliers or something to hold it. And all it takes is just a few seconds, and you'll see that you can just adjust it, and then within very quickly it will. You don't have a lot of time. It'll then take on the shape of the new. Obviously, we've distorted this from being straight to not straight, but just to show you. One of the great things about it is if you don't like what you've done, obviously you can just bend it back at any time, but actually if you just put it back in the hot water, this particular resin that we use at Black Scorpion is quite firm, so it's not. We used to use a different resin which was easier to bend, but this one's a bit firmer. But what you'll notice is if you actually just put it back, the water's hot enough, it'll actually naturally just return to its shape without you doing anything. So you can always play with things and then just put it back in the water and it'll. So another thing it's great for is what I'll tend to do is once I've just attached a model to its base, it's particularly with tags, it's not always obvious that it's going to sit nicely on the base, and so I'll just dip the feet in to the boiling or nearly boiling water, give it a few seconds, and then just position it so the pose is more upright, or however you want it. You might have a preference. And again, once it comes out of the water, you've only got a couple of seconds to kind of adjust it, but if you're not happy, just do it again. There's no limit to. And remember that by just dipping it back in, it will naturally try to return to its original shape. So this is also good to know because occasionally you might have a situation where you have resin models that maybe you've packed in a case or something, and over time they may slightly warp. It probably shouldn't happen with ours anymore because of like I said, we're using a nice firm resin that kind of avoids that, but it can happen with some models. Or in an extreme example, if you're living in, the south of Spain or Texas or something, and you have models that leave them in the boot of your car, and the temperature is so much, and you open them up and they're all drooping. This is a nice way to fix it because you don't even have to remember how it was. You can just put it in the boiling water; it will naturally return to its shape. And you can even do that with painted models. Obviously, it's not ideal, but I have done it with painted models and it hasn't affected the paint too much. So another example is something like this little owl here. You might want to just adjust something just to see how the wings look. If it's, like I say, the thicker the part, the more it's going to need to, the longer it's going to need, and you need to be sure the water is boiling. With very thin parts, you can actually use something like a hairdryer just to very gently manipulate it. So as you see there, you can just, it's quite an extreme example. try that, and then just to show you again, if you then don't like that, just dip it back in and it will, we can't see in the water, but it'll actually just slowly on its own return to its natural shape. And if at any point you see it struggling to do that, just make sure you just boil some new water just to make sure it's really hot. As you can see, just by dipping in, it's kind of returned to where it was. This is a model, it's the miscast. It's got a bit of a mold tail. Just in a box as an example, just as so things like you can just dip the arm in. This water's starting to get a bit cool now, but so yeah, it's quite simple. Just boiling water, dip the part in. Careful you don't burn yourself. Adjust the parts either just to repose it or correct a pose or slightly bent weapon or something that's bent over time. And again, if you're ever not happy, just dip it back in the boiling water and it will on its own return to its natural shape. If you're dealing with extremely thick resin part, we don't personally do anything like that, but you know, if you've got something very large like a big tank or Titan with a very thick part, that can be more difficult to bend, but generally for most models it's very simple and easy. Like I say, different resins may be easier to bend than others and need longer in the water, but generally it's a few seconds. So yeah, I pretty much always do that. I'll always, when I put a model on its base, I'll nearly always very slightly adjust just to make sure it's kind of standing in an upright way. And of course, just to slightly adjust or pose your models, it's great. And obviously this is works with resin, not with plastic, or I don't know if it works with some of the kind of offshoots of plastic, kind of the Chinese PVC type things. I'm not sure about those, but it certainly doesn't work with hard plastic. But most resins, polyurethane resins, it should work with. And of course, you could always just give it a go. You can't really do any damage. So hopefully that's of help. Thank you.